This video is going to focus on a description of a face. This was actually the 2018 AQA question. And we are going to go through each of these 12 skills which will deliver you a top grade guaranteed. Number 1, simply focus on what you can see in the image. Rose begins. The shaman's intense peace was startling. Wisdom, acceptance, and pure love oozed out of him, meandering into my very soul. So she hasn't started with the visual description of what is in the image. She has described what she sees in the image. And that's important because it is what is suggested by the picture. And that allows you to be much more creative. In her second paragraph, she is going to describe what is actually there in the image. I examined him, deep-rooted marks on his face, bore witness of experience of battles fought. But again, she's looking at the lines on his face and isn't describing the lines. She's describing the significance of those lines on his personality and his experience of life. Clever. Next, she looks at the beard and has decided it's winding and wispy, but instead of just relying on what it actually looks like, she's decided this symbolises something, the flow and ebb of truth, confronting her own past decisions. So what she can see is actually much more than just the physical things in the image, it's what the image makes her think about. At number 2, I have the sounds of the words that you use, in particular using sibilants, because most students won't do that, and sibilants can create a feeling of peace or something more sinister, so it will fit any single bit of writing that you do. We have sibilants here with the shaman's intense peace being startling. It creates that soothing sensation through the repetition of the S's. We have a winding, wispy beard symbolising. So we've got the sibilants of symbolising wispy with the alliteration of winding and wispy. We have more sibilants when the kind smile carved itself into the shaman's face. So even though carving is quite a violent action, we have the soothing sibilants to show how peaceful the shaman is. Next, we need to consider the power of verbs. The more you can think about verbs, the more powerful and memorable and effective your writing will be. So we get the sense of how much love there was in the shaman because it oozed out of him. We get the idea of how effective it is in calming her because it meanders into her soul, taking its time, filling her up. We get the idea that the shaman is always full of happiness because the smile is carved into his face. It's a smile he can't get rid of. We know the fire is really hot because it roared. We know he has a real impact on her because his eyes pierced into her eyes. We know that her feeling of grief is really powerful because the grief bulldozed through her. So you get the idea of really powerful verbs helping the reader understand exactly what we should feel about the characters and the moment. 4 and 5 go together. Create a character and make yourself a character, and you've already got a sense of how that works. So taking this picture and making this person a character in a scene, and then putting yourself alongside that character in the scene, simply allows you to describe much more than you can see in the actual picture. After all, you could run out of ideas. What the hell would I keep writing about? But if you're thinking about the thoughts and actions of this character, and then the thoughts and actions of you, the writer, in the scene as well as another character, you will never run out of ideas, and you will always have an element of conflict. And conflict makes writing exciting, and exciting writing gets great grades. Remember, nothing exciting has to happen in this exciting writing. You just need a conflict of ideas and viewpoints. And most importantly, nobody, absolutely nobody, has to die. 50% of students will kill somebody in their descriptive writing and the examiner will go, "Ugh, not again." Get a life. Right, the most secret of secret techniques, I think, is contrast, whereas good writers use contrast all the way through their writing. Let me show you. Love oozed out of the shaman, even though he's fought many battles. We have 2 characters, so I can now contrast all the way through I with him. He is going to be one thing, I am going to be completely different, and he is going to transform me during the course of my writing. This means the ending is always a contrast to the beginning, and Rose actually ends with a further contrast between love and hate. The ending is another contrast because it's the first moment of speech. That has stopped the whole description turning into a story, but it also is a dramatic way to contrast with what went before. The man himself is full of contrasts. He has a coarse hand, which at the same time is gentle. His whole body or his face, his ears and whiskers and hairs are asking a question. So that's a contrast with what we'd expect. Obviously, we'd only expect the mouth to ask that, but the asking is being done silently. A further contrast, an oxymoron if you like. Then we have the contrast of the universe and you. Something enormous, something tiny. The character themselves is now described as a contrast between good and evil, between light and dark. I'm not going to show you every contrast because, as you can see, they stitch the whole piece together. They are literally everywhere. And if you can do this, if you can build your writing around contrasts, you're automatically going to get a grade 7 or higher. You can't help it. Now, a really easy skill to master is starting each sentence as far as you can with a different word. That forces you to have sentence variety, which forces you to be interesting. You just won't be able to help yourself. Let's see what that looks like. The shaman, wisdom, scrupulously, deep-rooted, attentive, each, as, there, all, and I could go on all the way through, and you'll see that so many sentences start with completely different words, and that stops the reader being able to predict what's coming next. It keeps them on the edge of their seat. Numbers 8 and 9 go together. You want some sentences which fit your description but show off. The easiest way to show off is to include a list, and that will give you a very long sentence, and that again is the easiest way to show off in any sentence. Make it long. Let's see the list. Yet before I became lost to regret for everything I've ever done wrong, for all my imperfection, all my hatred, rage, deceit, lies, manipulation and indifference, the shaman reached out a calloused, healing hand. So we have a 34-word sentence there, which builds up in power, shows off all this brilliant vocabulary. Each word fits the description. It's not there just to say, hey guys, I can use some long words. It actually describes the character fantastically, and then ends with this contrast of the shaman to the description of the person in the piece. It's really clever. And then, of course, the other show-off sentence to include is a short sentence to contrast with this massive one. And we'll see that show-off sentence done earlier as well, and it was so, a very short sentence, and it shows off by being a paragraph on its own. The paragraph that ends it is actually over 40 words long. Again, a really long sentence to show off the writer's skills. Endings are much more important than any other part of your writing. It's what stays in everybody's mind most, and therefore is going to most contribute to your grade. So how does she craft her ending? Well, she's crafted it in a number of ways we've already looked at. She's made it a show-off sentence over 40 words long. She's also included the contrast that we had. She's also included speech for the very first time. So these are surprises for the reader. But the other thing I think she's done here is remembered a sentence either from a film or something she's read. It is a moment-to-moment choice we all have to make. Will we choose love or hate? It's a really powerful rhythmic sentence which feels like Rose already had in the back of her mind when she went into the exam. And in point 12 we'll also see another way that it works as an ending because it includes this complex punctuation. Before we get there, we're going to look at the figurative language, simile, metaphor and personification. Pure love oozed out of him, which indicates how much love was in him. It meandered into her soul, which showed how slow it was, but also how it got into every part of her. The shaman has been fighting battles with his own mind, which shows how the character herself is also going to find it difficult to overcome her own mind, but also the shaman is going to be able to help her win that battle because he's won his own. We've seen how the metaphor of a smile being carved into the shaman's face shows that it's permanent and therefore he's always happy. We've seen the surprising personification of the things on his head and face silently asking a question. They've been personified as though the parts of his face are actually people in their own right. There's a lovely simile as all these parts of her personality were laid out like a card deck. And this gives us the idea that she can choose what to be by picking what card she wants, or she'll pick a card but fate has already decided what she's going to be. So there's some interesting conflict going on there, but it's a simile that works fantastically to make us think in this way about the character and what's going to happen to her. The meeting with the shaman is like a test, another great simile, because she's used what she's in, an examination room, to think, how can I use this in my own writing? So she's feeling examined, it's like a test, and that allows her then to go on to have the contrast as we saw earlier. Oh no, it's not really like a test because I don't need to get the right answer. You can see without me going through the whole piece that this figurative language is in virtually every single paragraph. Now, it's important to realise that she's never chucking these in just to prove that she can use them. She's always chosen metaphor, personification and simile that helps us, the reader, to understand what's going on with the characters. Remember that when description goes wrong, it's because students just chuck loads of stuff in to prove they can do it, rather than thinking, how am I going to describe this in a way that feels real? And there's a really easy test to see if it feels real. If you look at the piece as a whole and think, actually, that could be the first page of a novel, it's real, it's going to score really high marks. If you've never read the beginning of a novel that's anything like what you've written, the chances are you're writing rubbish, full of descriptive techniques that don't actually belong together. At number 12, we have the colon and semicolon. Now, the examiners say this is the thing that candidates get wrong most frequently when they're going for top grades. So only use these if you know what you're doing. I'm going to show you how Rose does it to sharpen up your practice. So a colon can be used to introduce an explanation. Here we have battles that the shaman has fought, and then the colon says, I'm now going to explain what sort of battles those were. Battles fought over the self. Another use for the colon is to introduce speech which is in the middle of a sentence. So here we have the colon, there we have the speech. And you probably also know the role of the colon in introducing a list. Most students know that one, so it's the one that's least interesting. Next we have two uses of the semicolon. So a semicolon links one sentence with what has gone before. So it effectively says, this happens because of what went before the colon. An intense feeling of grief bulldozed through me. I saw everything I'd ever done in my entire life return to me, each action wanting acknowledgement. Yes, so that only happened because this grief came into her mind. So that is a correct use of the semicolon. Here, this only happens because of what came before the colon. It is a moment-to-moment choice we all have to make. So we only choose whether to love or hate because we're making choices every moment of the waking day. And of course, it's a really good tactic to put these bits of punctuation so close to the ending because it forces the examiner to remember how awesome you are. Many of those skills, of course, can be used if the picture is not a face. And if you want to see how to describe a place in your writing, you need to check out the video appearing now.